Some nights, Lindsay Morris wondered if she'd ever stop feeling invisible. 27 years old, single, working double shifts at a hospital that didn't know her name, going home every night to a house where she paid rent but was never treated like family. The February wind cut through her thin scrub jacket like a punishment. 12 hours on her feet, 2 patients lost, 1 doctor who'd screamed at her in front of the entire ER for a mistake that wasn't hers. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Ivan. Her boyfriend, 12 missed calls in 2 hours. Her stomach tightened, but she shoved the phone back in her pocket. Tomorrow. I'll deal with him tomorrow. 1 block to her apartment. The alley between Morrison and Clark would save her 5 minutes. She turned the corner and heard voices. Men's voices. Low. Angry. Every instinct told her to turn around, but something, curiosity, stupidity, fate, pulled her forward. 3 men stood in the shadows ahead, 2 of them facing a third, their backs to her. The third man stood with his spine straight, shoulders squared, like he owned the ground beneath his feet. Tall, dark hair, a coat that probably cost more than her rent. Salvatore. One of the men spat the name like a curse. Roselli sends his regards. The tall man's voice came back cool and steady. Tell Dante he can send his regards in person, if he has the spine. The gunshot cracked through the alley. Lindsay's hand flew to her mouth. The tall man stumbled backward, hand pressed to his stomach, and collapsed against the wall. The 2 men ran, footsteps echoing until they disappeared into the night. Then silence, just her breath and the distant hum of the city. Run, her mind screamed. Call the police and run. But 10 years as an ER nurse had rewired her brain. When someone was hurt, she moved toward them, not away. She dropped to her knees beside him. Blood. Dark and spreading, seeping between his fingers where he clutched his stomach. His face was pale, jaw clenched, but his eyes, amber brown, almost golden, found hers with an intensity that sent electricity shooting down her spine. You should go. His voice was strained, but the command in it was unmistakable. They might come back. Lindsay's training kicked in. She pulled his hand away from the wound. Entry point lower, left abdomen, significant blood loss, possible organ damage. She pressed her palms against the hot pulse of his blood and felt him tense beneath her. Shut up, I'm a nurse. She fumbled for her phone with one bloody hand, dialed 911. This is Lindsay Morris, ER nurse at Chicago General. Gunshot wound, lower left abdomen, significant hemorrhage. Corner of Morrison and Clark, alley entrance. Send an ambulance now. She hung up and turned back to him. His eyes were still on her, studying her face with an intensity that made something twist in her chest, her green eyes, the dirty blonde hair falling across her cheek, the determination in her jaw. Why is he looking at me like that? Lindsay Morris. He repeated her name slowly, like he was carving it into memory. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. You're bossy. And you're bleeding out. She pressed harder, and he hissed through his teeth. What's your name? Tony. His hand came up to cover hers on his stomach, warm despite the blood, strong despite the wound. Tony Salvatore. The name meant nothing to her, but something about the way he said it, like it should mean something, made unease prickle down her spine. Okay, Tony Salvatore, stay with me. Keep your eyes open. His gaze held hers, and she felt the weight of it like a physical thing. His thumb brushed against her wrist, finding her pulse. Your heart's racing. His voice was weaker now, but something almost like amusement flickered in those amber eyes. That happens when people get shot in front of me. She kept pressure on the wound, kept her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. The ambulance is coming. You're going to be fine. Liar. But he said it softly, almost tenderly, sirens in the distance, getting closer. His eyes started to flutter and panic spiked through her. Hey, stay with me. Tony, look at me. His gaze found hers again. His bloody hand rose trembling and touched her cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so strangely intimate, that she forgot to breathe. "Don't let me die in the street, Angel." The word hit her like ice water. Angel. A bitter thought crystallized in her exhausted mind. If he knew anything about me, he'd know I was nobody's angel, nobody's anything. But she didn't say that. She just pressed harder on his wound and watched the ambulance lights paint the alley red and blue. Across the street, in the back of a black sedan, Dante Rosselli watched through tinted glass. The girl kneeling in the blood. Salvatore, barely conscious, still looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. He lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. Interesting. His phone was already in his hand, capturing the image. The nurse, the blood, the beginning of something he could use. The sedan pulled away and disappeared into the Chicago night. The next morning, Lindsay pushed through the ER doors with coffee she didn't taste and sleep she hadn't gotten. His face kept flashing behind her eyes, amber eyes in the dark, blood on her hands. "Don't let me die in the street, Angel." The recognition that passed between them was instant, electric. His gaze moved over her face slowly, her green eyes, the shadows beneath them, the tension in her jaw, and something in his expression shifted, softened. His voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You kept me alive." 3 words, simple, but they hit her chest like a fist. Lindsay's fingers tightened on the chart. She forced her voice steady, professional. "I did my job. How's your pain level? Scale of 1 to 10. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. 11. But I've had worse. She set the chart down and moved closer to check his bandages, her fingers brushing the edge of the gauze where it met his skin. He was warm, too warm, and she could feel the tension in his muscles as she pressed gently along the wound site. This might hurt. She kept her voice clinical, detached, even as her pulse betrayed her. His breath hitched when she applied pressure, but he didn't flinch. Instead, his hand came up and caught her wrist. Lindsay froze. His grip wasn't tight, but it was absolute. His thumb resting directly over her pulse point, feeling every rapid beat she couldn't hide. His skin was rough, calloused, and the heat of his palm burned through her like a brand. "Your hands are shaking." His voice was low, rough from sleep and pain and something else she didn't want to name. She tried to pull back. His fingers tightened, just slightly, and held her there. "I'm fine." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Tony's amber eyes searched her face, moving from her eyes to her lips and back again with a slowness that made her skin prickle. The room felt smaller suddenly, the beeping monitors too loud, the antiseptic smell mixing with something warmer underneath. Cedar maybe, or smoke. "You saved my life." His thumb traced a slow circle against her inner wrist, right where her blood pounded fastest. "That's not nothing." Lindsay's breath caught. She should step back, should remind him of boundaries, of professionalism, of the dozen reasons this was a terrible idea. But his touch anchored her in place, and the way he looked at her, like she was the only solid thing in a world gone sideways, made her forget every single one. "You shouldn't be awake yet," she finally managed, her voice coming out softer than intended. "The anesthesia... I don't like being unconscious." He released her wrist slowly, his fingers trailing across her palm before falling away. The absence of his touch felt like a loss. Bad things happen when you can't see them coming. The words landed heavy between them. Lindsay didn't ask what he meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. She was reaching for the IV panel when the door swung open without a knock. Evan. Firefighter uniform, jaw tight, eyes scanning the room like he was looking for evidence of something. Lindsay's stomach dropped. She stepped between him and the bed instinctively, lowering her voice. "Evan, what are you doing here?" His hand found her elbow, grip too firm, trying to pull her toward the door. 12 calls, Linz. You didn't come home last night. We need to talk." She planted her feet and pulled her arm free, keeping her voice low but sharp. "This is a patient's room. You can't just walk in here like this. I'm your boyfriend. I think I have a right to—" "Get out." Lindsay's eyes flicked to Tony, still watching, expression unreadable, then back to Evan. She could feel heat climbing up her neck, embarrassment and anger tangling together. "I'm working. This is my job. Wait outside, and we'll talk when my shift ends." Evan's jaw tightened. For a moment, something ugly flashed across his face, possessive, almost threatening. But then his phone buzzed in his pocket, and again. He pulled it out, and Lindsay caught a glimpse of the screen before he could hide it. Red notification banners, payment overdue, final notice. His expression shifted, tight, almost panicked. The realization crept through her slowly. Something's wrong, something he's not telling me. Fine. Evan shoved the phone back in his pocket, not meeting her eyes. "We'll talk later." He turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him. Lindsay stood, frozen for a moment, her heart still pounding, the silence in the room suddenly deafening. "Boyfriend." Tony's voice came from behind her, low, almost amused. "He seems attentive." Lindsay turned back to face him, her cheeks burning. "I'm sorry about that. It won't happen again." Tony's amber eyes held hers, and something in his expression made her breath catch, not judgment. Something closer to curiosity. A man who grabs a woman's arm like that in public. He paused, letting the words hang. "I wonder what he does in private." The observation landed like a blade between her ribs. Lindsay opened her mouth to defend Evan, to explain, to make excuses. But nothing came out. Because, somewhere deep down, she was starting to wonder the same thing. The rest of the day passed in a blur of vitals and medication schedules, and Lindsay found herself carefully avoiding Tony Salvatore's gaze whenever she entered the room. He slept most of the afternoon, but when he was awake, he watched her, those amber eyes tracking her across the room like she was something he was trying to figure out. By evening, Lindsay was exhausted. She finished her final chart notes and gathered her things, ready to hand off to the night shift. One last check, protocol, and she pushed open the door to Suite 11. Tony was awake. Sitting up slightly, the sheets pooled at his waist, his hospital gown doing nothing to hide the bandages wrapped around his torso. His eyes lifted to meet hers the moment she stepped inside. He didn't smile, didn't move, just looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His voice was low and absolute. "We're not done, Lindsay." The door clicked shut behind her. The sound was too loud in the silence. Lindsay's heart slammed against her ribs. She should say something, should walk away, should remind him that she was just his nurse, that this was just a job, that whatever he thought was happening, but the words wouldn't come. She stood, frozen in the doorway, caught in the gravity of his gaze, and the thought crystallized sharp and cold. This man is dangerous, and I don't think I care. The VIP corridor had changed since morning. 2 men flanked the entrance where there had been none before. They didn't stop her, but their eyes tracked her badge, her face, her hands, cataloguing everything. What kind of patient needs this much security? She already knew the answer. Suite 11's door was heavier than she remembered. She pushed inside and stopped. Tony Salvatore was awake. He sat propped against the raised bed, bandages visible beneath his hospital gown, 4 lines trailing from his arm, like leashes he barely tolerated. But his attention wasn't on the monitors. It was on her, and it had been since the moment she'd walked through the door. His eyes were the same amber brown she remembered from the alley. Sharp, watchful. But there was something else there now. Something that looked almost like relief. "You." His voice was low, roughened by sleep and painkillers. I remember your hands. Lindsay's fingers tightened on her clipboard. You kept pressure on the wound. Talked to me when I was fading. His eyes never left her face. You saved my life. She kept her voice clinical. I'm a nurse. That's what we do. Tony's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. That's not what you do. That's what you did. There's a difference. She busied herself checking his vitals, adjusting the IV, doing anything to avoid those amber eyes that seemed to see straight through her. But she could feel him watching. Every movement she made, his gaze followed like a physical touch, tracing the line of her jaw, the curve of her neck. She leaned closer to inspect the bandages, and his eyes tracked down to her lips, then back up with an intensity that made her skin flush hot. Mr. Salvatore, her voice came out sharper than intended. Stop looking at me like that. His mouth curved into something between a smile and a challenge. Like what? Like... She faltered, heat climbing up her neck. You know exactly like what. He tilted his head, those amber eyes never leaving her face. Can't help it. Looking at something beautiful is good for the soul. Lindsay's breath caught. She should have a response for that. Something professional, something dismissive, but her mind went blank. No one had ever looked at her the way Tony Salvatore was looking at her right now. Like she was worth staring at, like she was worth wanting. The thought crept through her unbidden, dangerous and warm, and she hated how much she didn't hate it. She pulled back and focused on the monitors, willing her heartbeat to slow, telling him she'd be back in an hour to check his vitals. His response was simple. I'll be here. Waiting. But the word landed heavy between them, a promise wrapped in a threat. A single command cleared the room. Rocco hesitated for half a second before obeying, and then Lindsay was alone with him. The door clicked shut. The air thickened. She became aware of the heat radiating from his body, the steady beep of monitors marking time she didn't have. He patted the edge of the mattress and told her to sit. Lindsay raised an eyebrow, something defiant sparking in her chest, and informed him that she was his nurse, not his pet. The corner of his mouth twitched, amusement maybe, or appreciation, and he explained that his neck hurt from looking up at her, that he'd rather not tear his stitches trying to sit straighter. Such a human complaint from a man who commanded armed guards with single words. Her guard slipped before she could catch it, and she found herself perched on the edge of his bed, close enough to feel his warmth through the blanket. His fingers brushed against hers, where they rested on the mattress. Light, barely there, but electricity raced up her arm and pooled low in her stomach. Her breath stuttered. She should pull away, should stand up, should remember every reason this was insane. She didn't move. He told her he wanted her. No other nurses, just her. His thumb traced a slow line across her knuckles, scattering every rational thought she'd ever had, and then 2 words. Say yes. The door swung open before she could answer. Evan stood in the doorway in his firefighter uniform, his expression darkening as he took in the scene, Lindsay on the edge of Tony's bed, the intimate distance between them, everything that looked exactly like what it was. His accusations came fast and sharp. Why was she here? Why did they request her specifically? Why was she sitting on a stranger's bed? Lindsay stood quickly, heat flooding her cheeks, stammering explanations that sounded hollow even to her own ears. Tony's voice cut through the chaos, calm and cold. She said, "That's all. Are you calling her a liar?" Fear flickered in Evan's eyes. Real fear, the kind that came from recognizing something dangerous. He took a step back, told Lindsay this wasn't over, and walked out. The door swung shut behind him. She stood frozen in the middle of the room. She should follow him, should smooth things over the way she always did. But her feet wouldn't move. Tony's voice pulled her back, low and rough. "That man doesn't own you. No one does. The words hit somewhere deep in her chest. She told him she should go, that her shift was ending, and moved toward the door. Her hand closed around the handle. Lindsay. She stopped. Didn't turn around. Don't disappear on me again. She walked out without looking back. Tara was waiting at the nurse's station, took one look at her face, and asked what the VIP had done. Lindsay slumped against the counter and tried to explain that he looked at her like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at, like he was undressing her with his eyes the entire time she checked his vitals. She expected sympathy. Instead, Tara leaned back with a dreamy sigh and asked if Lindsay had actually seen him. That jawline, those eyes. She'd nearly walked into a wall that morning. A girl has needs, Tara said, and that man looks like he could meet every single one of them. Lindsay shook her head, but a smile tugged at her lips despite herself. Tara offered to get her reassigned if he was making her uncomfortable. The refusal came out before Lindsay could stop it. No, she could handle it. Tara studied her with knowing eyes. Sure you can. Lindsay walked away, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that a door had opened inside her she didn't know how to close. Lindsay's hands still tingled where Tony had touched them. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to shake the sensation as she pulled into the cracked driveway of the Morris house. The whole drive home, his voice had echoed in her head, low, rough, absolute. Don't disappear on me again. The thought crept through her unbidden. What does he want from me? She didn't have an answer. Worse, she wasn't sure she wanted one. The front door looked the same as always, peeling paint, crooked numbers, a welcome mat that had never meant welcome. She pushed through, and the familiar tightness banded her chest immediately. The living room smelled like Meredith's lavender candles and old resentment. Every surface was cluttered with decorative pillows and framed photos, Meredith and Ron's wedding, their vacations, their life. Not a single image of Lindsay anywhere. 12 years in this house, and she might as well have been a ghost passing through. Meredith appeared from the kitchen with the usual complaints. Lindsay was late, the laundry wasn't done, nothing was ever good enough. The bitterness rose in Lindsay's throat before she could stop it. I was saving a man's life. I was being undressed by amber eyes. I was trying to remember who I used to be before I became your unpaid maid. But the words stayed locked behind her teeth. She told Meredith she'd do it now, and Meredith turned back to the kitchen without another glance. Her room was at the end of the hall, the smallest one, barely bigger than a closet. Nothing here felt like hers. Lindsay sank onto the edge of her bed and pressed her palms against her eyes, letting the pressure push back the ache building behind them. The doorbell rang. Meredith's voice carried down the hall, syrupy sweet in a way it never was for Lindsay. Evan was here. Footsteps approached. The door opened without a knock. He stood in the doorway, wearing his volunteer firefighter jacket, the hero costume everyone was supposed to see. His arms came around her before she could stand, pulling her into a hug that felt more like containment than comfort. She held herself still, waiting for it to end. He asked about her day, about the VIP patient, watching her face with something calculating flickering behind his concerned expression. Lindsay moved toward the window, putting distance between them, telling him it was fine, just busy. Evan followed, sitting on her bed like he owned the space. When are we getting our own place? This house is suffocating me. She turned to face him, arms crossing over her chest. Evan, you make good money. Why is it always my savings we're talking about? His jaw tightened. For a moment something ugly flashed across his features before he smoothed it away with a practiced smile. He talked about helping his mum, some charity he volunteered with, how her savings could help them start fresh. His words sounded right, they always did, but doubt whispered at the edges of her mind, impossible to silence. He's never shown you his bank statements. Never introduced you to these people. Never let you meet his mother. She pulled her hand free gently and told him she needed to think about it. His expression flickered, frustration bleeding through the concerned boyfriend mask. He stood, pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Don't think too long." His voice was light, but there was an edge underneath. "Opportunities don't wait forever." He left without another word. Lindsay stood by the window, watching his truck pull away. The wrongness settled deeper into her bones with every passing second. Something's off. Something he's not telling you. She was about to turn away when movement caught her eye. A car, black sedan, tinted windows, parked across the street, engine idling. The same car, fourth time today. Why do I keep seeing this car? Lindsay's feet ached and her eyes burned from 6 days of double shifts, her body finally starting to rebel against the relentless pace. She pushed through the VIP corridor, clipboard in hand, running on caffeine and stubbornness. Tony's vitals needed checking. That was all. Just another patient. Just another day. The lie tasted bitter even as she formed it. Rocco and John stood outside Suite 11 like sentinels, arms crossed, faces carved from stone. They nodded as she approached, a grudging respect that hadn't been there a week ago. She was reaching for the door handle when footsteps echoed behind her. "Linz!" Evan stood in the middle of the VIP corridor, wearing his firefighter jacket and that easy smile he used when he wanted something, like he had every right to be there. Lindsay turned, her brows pulling together. "Evan, it's 2 in the afternoon. Shouldn't you be at the station?" He shrugged, hands sliding into his pockets. Day off. The suspicion coiled tighter in her chest. She studied his face, searching for something she couldn't name. "You've had a lot of those lately, almost every day this week." Something flickered across his features, irritation, maybe, or guilt, before he smoothed it away. "What can I say? Seniority has its perks." The explanation felt hollow. Lindsay opened her mouth to push harder, but before she could speak, a scream tore through the corridor. "Fire! There's a fire in pediatrics!" The words hit like ice water. Lindsay's head snapped toward the sound, a nurse sprinting past, face white with panic, voice raw with terror. "The children's ward! Someone help!" Lindsay didn't think. Her body moved before her mind could catch up, feet already carrying her toward the stairwell. She grabbed Evan's arm, pulling him with her. "Evan, come on. You're a firefighter. Tell me what to do. We have to help them." Evan's feet stayed planted. His face had gone pale, eyes darting toward the exit sign at the end of the hall. "We should wait for the fire department." His voice came out thin, reedy. "I don't have my equipment. You can't expect me to run into a fire without gear." Lindsay stared at him, the words refusing to make sense, no matter how many times she replayed them in her head. "There are children down there, Evan, and there are professionals on the way." He took a step backward, toward the elevator. "I'm not dying for someone else's mistake." The disappointment crashed through her like a wave, cold and absolute. She'd known something was wrong with him, had felt it for weeks. But this cowardice wearing a hero's costume was worse than anything she'd imagined. She didn't waste another second on him. Lindsay ran. Inside Suite 11, Tony heard everything. The screams, the panic, Lindsay's voice desperate and determined, and then that pathetic excuse of a man refusing to help when children were in danger. Rocco appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Boss." The girl ran towards the fire. "She's trying to evacuate the pediatric ward." Tony was already pushing himself up, jaw clenched against the pain that ripped through his abdomen. The stitches screamed in protest. He ignored them. "Boss, you shouldn't—" "I'm not losing her to flames." Tony's voice came out low, deadly. "Especially not while that coward runs the other way." He stood, and the room tilted dangerously, but he steadied himself against the bed frame and forced his spine straight, forced his legs to hold him. Rocco and John fell into step behind him as he walked toward the stairwell, every step agony and every breath burning in his chest. But the image of Lindsay running into smoke and fire, alone, unprotected, drove him forward. He would not let her die. Not today. Not ever. The pediatric ward was chaos. Smoke billowed through the corridor in thick black waves, stinging Lindsay's eyes and clawing at her lungs, while alarms shrieked and children cried and parents screamed for help. Lindsay moved through it all like a woman possessed, guiding families toward the emergency exits, carrying a toddler who'd been separated from her mother, shouting instructions over the roar of flames. Her throat burned and her vision blurred, but she kept moving. The thought pounded through her with every step. Where is Evan? Where is anyone? She turned to grab another child, a boy, maybe 6, frozen with terror in the middle of the hallway, and that's when the smoke finally won. Her knees buckled. The world went grey at the edges, then black, and Lindsay felt herself falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Tony moved through the smoke like a man who'd walked through hell before and survived, his lungs burning and his wound screaming with every step. But Lindsay was in his arms, limp and fragile, and nothing else mattered. His voice was rough against her hair, barely audible over the chaos. "I've got you. I've got you, Angel." He carried her out, through the smoke, down the stairs, past the firefighters finally arriving with their hoses and their gear. Rocco cleared a path. John kept the crowds back, and Tony didn't stop until they reached the hospital garden, fresh air filling his lungs as he lowered Lindsay gently onto the grass, her eyes fluttered. Opened, green meeting amber in the afternoon light. Tony's hand found her hair, stroking the soot-stained strands back from her face. The tenderness in his touch surprised even him. His voice dropped low, intimate. "There you are. An angel and a hero. That's what you are, Lindsay Morris." She coughed, wincing, her hand coming up to grip his wrist. "You shouldn't have gotten up, Mr. Salvatore. Your stitches. I couldn't leave you in there." His thumb traced along her cheekbone, and the touch sent electricity racing through her despite everything. "I won't ever leave you." Lindsay's breath caught. She should pull away, should remind him of boundaries, of professionalism, of the boyfriend who... The thought stopped cold. The boyfriend who had run, who had left her to face the flames alone while he saved himself. Tony's eyes held hers, and the understanding in them was devastating. He knew. He'd seen everything. His voice was quiet, absolute. "I saved you. Now you owe me." Lindsay managed a weak laugh, pushing herself up onto her elbows. "Then we're even. I saved you first." Tony's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. "No, we're not even." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek. "We'll only be even when you marry me." The world stopped. Lindsay's eyes went wide, shock rippling through her. "Marry you? I have a boyfriend." "You mean the firefighter who left you to burn?" Tony's voice hardened, something cold and dangerous flickering in his amber gaze. "The coward who ran while you choked on smoke trying to save children." She flinched. The truth of it cut deep. Tony's hand cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "A man like that doesn't deserve a woman like you. He's a fraud, Lindsay, a con artist wearing a hero's uniform, and I will never let him have you." His thumb brushed across her lower lip. Feather light. "You're mine now." Something snapped inside her. Lindsay pushed his hand away and staggered to her feet, her legs trembling but her spine straight. "No one owns me, Mr. Salvatore." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "I'm not property. I'm not a prize, and I'm certainly not yours. I'll be with whoever I choose." Tony rose slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. but the smile that spread across his face was anything but pained. "Oh, but you are mine." His amber eyes blazed with certainty, with hunger, with something that looked terrifyingly like devotion. "You just don't know it yet." Lindsay turned and walked away on shaking legs, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. But even as she put distance between them, she couldn't shake the heat of his gaze on her back, couldn't forget the way his hands had felt in her hair, couldn't silence the traitorous whisper in the back of her mind. What if he's right? The oxygen mask felt like a cage against Lindsay's face. She lay in the recovery bay with her throat raw and her lungs aching, staring at the fluorescent lights above, while nurses moved around her in efficient silence. The fire was out, the children were safe, and somewhere in this hospital, Tony Salvatore was lying in a bed with torn stitches because he'd walked through smoke and flames to find her. Rocco appeared at the edge of her curtain, arms crossed, that permanent scowl softened by something that looked almost like respect. Boss didn't care about his wound. His voice was gruff, matter-of-fact. Ripped half his stitches getting to that floor. Doctors said he could have bled out. He went anyway. The words landed like stones in her chest. Lindsay's fingers curled into the thin hospital blanket, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. The question crept through her unbidden, settling somewhere deep. Why would he do that? For me? He barely knows me. She didn't say it out loud. Couldn't. But something shifted in her chest, a crack in the wall she'd been building since the moment Tony Salvatore first looked at her like she was something worth protecting. Evan arrived 20 minutes later, bursting through the curtain with theatrical concern painted across his face. "Oh my God, Linz!" He rushed to her bedside, reaching for her hand with fingers that felt clammy and unfamiliar. "I've been looking everywhere for you. When I heard what happened, where were you?" Lindsay's voice came out hoarse, scraped raw by smoke. Evan's expression flickered, just for a moment, before settling into something wounded and defensive. "I was helping on the upper floor. 3rd level. There were kids trapped up there too, you know. I couldn't just—" "There are no kids on the 3rd floor, Evan." The words hung between them like a blade. Lindsay watched his face cycle through surprise, confusion, and finally that familiar flash of irritation he always got when she caught him in something. The 3rd floor was storage, equipment rooms, locked closets full of medical supplies. Everyone who worked here knew that. I meant he stumbled over the excuse, hands gesturing vaguely. The stairwell. I was clearing the stairwell. The lie was so obvious it almost hurt to hear. Evan reached for her face, his palm sliding against her cheek in a gesture that used to feel comforting. Now it felt like a performance, hollow and practiced. Lindsay pulled away. It was a small movement, just a turn of her head, a slight lean back against the pillow. But Evan's hand froze in midair, and something ugly flashed through his eyes before he controlled it. "You're tired," he said, dropping his hand. "We'll talk later." He left without looking back, and Lindsay lay there in the silence, understanding dawning slowly then, all at once. She'd been making excuses for him for 2 years, explaining away the inconsistencies, the stories that didn't quite add up, the heroic tales that always seemed to happen when no one else was watching. The realization settled in her stomach like something heavy and cold. I don't know who he is. I never did. Tony's room felt different when she entered the next morning. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm, sunlight cut through the blinds in golden stripes, and Tony lay propped against the pillows, his amber eyes finding her the moment she crossed the threshold, tracking her movement with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. She kept her voice professional, her hands steady as she reached for his chart. His response was 2 words, "Better now," but his voice dropped low on them, intimate, and a slow burn ignited somewhere in Lindsay's core that she desperately tried to ignore. She focused on the chart, on the numbers, on anything except the way his gaze felt like a physical touch moving across her face. She told him his stitches had to be redone, that the doctors said he was lucky he didn't cause permanent damage. Lindsay. Her name in his mouth stopped her cold. Tony's hand caught her wrist, gentle, not demanding, and his thumb found her pulse point with the kind of precision that made her breath catch. He could feel her heartbeat. He knew exactly what he was doing to her. Look at me. Not a request, not quite a command, something in between. She looked. His amber eyes had gone soft, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen from him before. The hard lines of his face seemed to ease as he held her gaze, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. If you ever run into a fire like that again. He paused, his jaw tightening like he was fighting something inside himself. I will tie you to a bed myself, because losing you is not something I'm willing to survive. The words sent electricity shooting down her spine. Lindsay's throat closed up, responses dying before they could form, and she stood there frozen with her wrist still caught in his hand and her pulse hammering against his thumb. She should say something professional, something that established boundaries. Instead, she just stood there, drowning in amber. Tony Salvatore's discharge was the most watched event the hospital had seen all year. Nurses found excuses to linger in the VIP corridor. Doctors who had no business on this floor suddenly needed to check charts. Even the administrative staff clustered near the elevators, pretending to work while their eyes stayed fixed on Suite 11. And then he appeared. Tony walked out in a navy suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body, shirt open at the collar, 2 buttons undone, just enough to hint at golden skin beneath. The bandage on his face somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. Lindsay watched from the nurse's station, her mouth going dry as whispered conversations erupted around her. Oh my God, look at him. I heard he's some kind of businessman, imports or something. Who cares what he does? Have you seen those shoulders? Tara appeared at Lindsay's elbow, her voice low and appreciative. That man should be illegal. Seriously, there should be laws. Lindsay couldn't respond. Because Tony was walking toward her now, and he wasn't looking at any of the women who'd stopped mid-task to stare at him. His amber eyes swept the corridor once, dismissing everyone else like they didn't exist, and then locked onto her. Every nurse was watching him. He was watching only her. Tony stopped in front of the nurse's station, close enough that Lindsay could smell cedar and something darker underneath, close enough that his voice wouldn't carry beyond her ears. I thought I lost you in that fire. The words came out rough, scraped raw. In that moment, nothing else existed. No one else mattered. Lindsay's heart slammed against her ribs, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. You don't know me, Mr. Salvatore. I helped you once. That's all it was, a nurse doing her job. Tony took one step closer. His presence surrounded her, warm and overwhelming and impossible to ignore. No. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. You're my angel. The most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. Heat rushed to her cheeks before she could stop it. No one will ever take you from me, Lindsay. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. When had he taken her hand? And the touch sent sparks racing up her arm. And I'm not a man who lets go of what's his. He turned and walked toward the elevator, with Rocco falling into step behind him, and Lindsay stood frozen at the nurse's station, with her pulse pounding. Bodyguards, shot in an alley. A man who takes what he wants. She watched the elevator doors close behind him. So why can't I stop thinking about him? The morning after Tony's discharge, whispers followed Lindsay through every corridor of the hospital. Fragments of conversation cut off as she passed. The VIP carried her out of the fire himself, ripped his stitches just to find her, and every word landed like a stone against her chest. Pride warred with embarrassment, gratitude twisted into resentment. and underneath it all lay the memory of Tony's hands in her hair as he carried her through smoke and flames. The anger at herself burned low and constant. He's dangerous, he's controlling. So why does my pulse race every time he walks into a room? Her name crackled through the intercom, summoning her to the director's office. Director Harrison's smile was too wide and too practiced as he delivered the news. Lindsay had been promoted to head nurse, effective immediately, thanks to some very generous donations the hospital had recently received. The lie sat between them like something rotting. Tony. This was Tony's doing, buying her a promotion the same way he'd made the fire investigation disappear. Lindsay walked out before the director could say anything else. She made it halfway down the corridor before she spotted Rocco blocking most of the hallway with his massive frame, holding flowers and a gift box. "From the boss." His voice was gruff, matter-of-fact. Something inside her finally snapped. "Take them back." The words came out cold and flat. "I don't want anything from him. Tell your boss that I am not for sale." Rocco's eyebrows rose, the first genuine surprise she'd ever seen on his weathered face, but Lindsay turned and walked away before he could respond. 3 hours later, Lindsay was picking at a cold sandwich in the cafeteria when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Now. Tony." She stared at the screen, her stomach dropping. Of course, he had her number. A man like Tony Salvatore could find out anything about anyone. She didn't respond, but Tony had never been a man who waited for permission. He found her 10 minutes later, appearing at her table like a shadow made solid. Evan. Tony's voice was quiet, meant only for her ears. "There's something you need to know about him." Lindsay's jaw tightened, and she forced herself to meet his amber gaze without flinching. She told him she didn't owe him anything about her life, that he didn't get to show up and demand her attention whenever he felt like it. Tony sat down without asking, his movements fluid despite the wound still healing beneath his expensive shirt. He told her that Evan wasn't a real firefighter, just a name on a volunteer list, that the children's charity had no record of him, that his bank accounts were deep in the red from gambling. The words landed like blows against something soft inside her chest, but she couldn't let him see that. "You're lying because you want to control me." Her voice came out harder than she felt. "I wish it were a lie." Tony leaned forward, close enough that she could smell cedar and something darker. "But I had him investigated. For you." Lindsay's throat tightened around unshed tears. She told him she didn't ask him to do that. No. Tony's hand moved toward hers, but stopped just short of touching. "But you needed someone to." Lindsay shoved her chair back and grabbed her tray. "Stay away from me, Mr. Salvatore, and stay away from my life." She pushed through the cafeteria doors, her mind spinning with accusations she didn't want to believe but couldn't quite dismiss. The cool evening air hit her face as she stepped outside, and that's when she saw Evan walking toward her from the parking lot, his firefighter jacket thrown over his shoulder like always. "Baby." He moved toward her with wounded concern. "I've been hearing things, people saying that mafia guy is after you." Lindsay studied his face with eyes that felt like they were seeing him clearly for the first time. She told him that Tony had said some things about his job, about the charity, about his finances. Evan's expression flickered before settling into righteous indignation. He asked if she really believed a criminal over the man who'd loved her for 2 years. The question hung between them, and Lindsay realized she didn't know the answer. Evan pressed forward, his voice softening into something that sounded almost genuine. He told her he'd found them an apartment, that they could start fresh, just the two of them. The offer hung in the air like an escape route, and Lindsay found herself reaching for it. "Okay, let's look at it." The next afternoon, she followed Evan to the parking garage to grab something from his truck. When he'd hesitated before saying yes, something cold had prickled at the back of her neck. Then she heard voices echoing off the concrete walls. Evan was pinned against a black SUV with Rocco's hand on his chest and Tony Salvatore standing in front of him like judgment itself. "Here's how this is going to work." Tony's voice was ice, his amber eyes flat and dangerous. "You're going to leave Lindsay alone. You're going to disappear from her life completely. And in exchange, I'm going to give you $500,000. Evan's eyes went wide, the greed warring with fear, and Lindsay could see the word yes already forming on his lips. "What are you doing?" Lindsay's voice echoed through the parking garage, and all three men turned to find her standing at the end of the row, her chest heaving with fury. She stormed toward them, positioning herself between Tony and Evan, her spine straight, despite the tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. "What kind of man are you?" The words tore out of her, aimed at Tony like weapons. "You think you can just buy people, buy their choices, buy me." Evan slipped behind her, his hand finding her shoulder with practiced tenderness, playing the wounded victim as he talked about how Tony had tried to purchase their love like it meant nothing. Tony's jaw tightened, his fist clenching at his side as he fought to control himself. Lindsay turned to Evan with something desperate blazing in her eyes. "Did you get the apartment, sweetheart?" Evan nodded eagerly, and Lindsay looked directly at Tony as she spoke her next words. "Then let's get married this week. Why wait? Why give anyone else a chance to interfere?" Evan's face lit up with theatrical joy, his arms sliding possessively around Lindsay's waist as he shot a triumphant look at Tony. He watched them with an expression carved from stone, his amber eyes revealing nothing. Then his mouth curved slowly into a smile that made the hair on Lindsay's neck stand up. "Fine, Lindsay." His voice was soft, almost gentle, and somehow that made it more terrifying. "Don't think for a moment that I'm giving up on you. This isn't over." He turned to Evan, pointed one finger at him, and let the silence speak for itself. Then he walked away, Rocco falling into step beside him. "What do we do now, boss?" Rocco asked as they reached the SUV. Tony's eyes stayed fixed on the spot where Lindsay stood, with her arms around a man who didn't deserve her. "Men like Evan? I've destroyed 100 of them." He slid into the back seat, his smile never wavering. "Of course, I have a plan." Lindsay stood in the doorway of Meredith and Ron's living room, with a cardboard box in her arms and 12 years of silence burning in her throat. Meredith sat on the couch with her arms crossed, watching Lindsay pack with the same cold expression she'd worn since the day a grieving 16-year-old had shown up on her doorstep with nothing but a suitcase and a social security check. "You think you can just leave?" Meredith's voice cut through the room like a blade. "After everything we've done for you?" Lindsay placed the box on the floor and turned to face her aunt, something shifting in her chest, a wall crumbling that had held back years of swallowed words. "What exactly did you do for me, Aunt Meredith?" Her voice came out steady, stronger than she expected. "You took my mother's social security checks. You made me work double shifts at 16 so I could contribute to the household. You never once asked how I was doing, never once treated me like family." Ron grunted from his recliner, not bothering to look up from the television. Ungrateful, just like her mother. The word should have hurt, but Lindsay felt nothing except a strange, cold clarity settling over her. "I don't owe you anything." She picked up her box again, her spine straight and her chin lifted. Not money, not gratitude, not another single day of pretending this was ever a real home. Meredith's face twisted with something ugly, rage mixed with spite. "You'll come crawling back. That firefighter boyfriend of yours won't stick around. Men never do with girls like you." Lindsay didn't respond, didn't look back, just walked through the door and closed it behind her with a soft click that felt more final than any slam ever could. Evan was waiting by his truck, and Lindsay watched him load her belongings alongside the 2 other boxes that contained her entire life. 27 years, and everything she owned fit in the back of a pickup. The thought should have been depressing, but instead it felt like shedding weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The apartment was small and old, tucked into a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the sidewalks cracked. But it was supposed to be hers, or at least that's what she kept telling herself. Evan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I know it's not much, but it's ours, Linz. The start of our life together." Lindsay leaned back into his embrace, trying to feel the comfort she knew she was supposed to feel. His arms were familiar, his scent was familiar, everything about this moment should have felt right. So why did her chest feel tight? Why did unease settle like fog in her mind? It's just nerves. New place, big changes. That's all this is. Evan checked his watch suddenly, frowning. Shit, I forgot I have a shift tonight. Night duty at the station. I'll be back in the morning. Lindsay watched him grab his jacket. I thought you said you were off this week. Schedule changed. He crossed to her and pressed a quick kiss to her forehead. Too quick, too distracted. You know how it is. Short-staffed, always calling people in. She didn't know how it was. She'd never actually seen his schedule, never met his colleagues, never been invited to any firehouse events he claimed to attend. Tony said he wasn't really a firefighter, just a name on a volunteer list. She pushed the thought away, hating herself for letting Tony's accusations creep into her mind like poison. Evan paused at the door, his hand on the knob, and turned back with a smile that showed too many teeth. Oh, I almost forgot. I booked us a slot at the courthouse. Day after tomorrow, 2 o'clock. We're getting married, baby. Lindsay's stomach dropped. She was the one who'd said it, standing in that parking garage with Tony's eyes burning into her back, throwing the words like weapons. Let's get married this week. She'd meant it as defiance, as proof that Tony Salvatore couldn't control her choices. Now that it was actually happening, something cold crawled through her chest. That's... wow. Okay. Evan's smile flickered for just a moment before settling back into practiced brightness. You said this week, babe. I made it happen. Isn't that what you wanted? Is it? Is this what I wanted? She forced a smile onto her face. Yeah, of course. I just didn't expect it to feel so real so fast. When you know, you know. Evan winked, already half out the door. Get some rest, future Mrs. Hale. The door closed behind him, and Lindsay stood in the middle of her new apartment with her heart hammering against her ribs. 2 days. In 2 days, she would be Evan Hale's wife. She sank onto the edge of the couch, her hands trembling. Tony hadn't tried to contact her since the parking garage. No calls, no texts, no bodyguards lurking in hallways. She should have been relieved that he'd finally backed off. So why did his silence feel more unsettling than his presence ever had? And why, when she closed her eyes and tried to imagine her wedding day, was it Tony's face she saw instead of Evan's? Lindsay stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, smoothing down the front of her white dress for the 3rd time in as many minutes. The dress was simple, knee-length modest neckline, nothing like the gowns she used to dream about as a little girl, flipping through her mother's old wedding magazines. But it was white, and it was hers, and in 2 hours she would be Mrs. Evan Hale. She pulled her hair into a low twist, securing it with pins that trembled slightly in her fingers, and studied her reflection with eyes that searched for certainty she didn't feel. Today, my new life begins. The thought moved through her mind like a mantra she was trying to force into truth. This is what I wanted. This is the right choice. Evan had left before dawn, pressing a distracted kiss to her forehead while she was still half asleep. Gotta swing by the station first, babe. I'll meet you at the courthouse. 2 o'clock sharp. She'd murmured something agreeable into her pillow, too tired to notice the way he'd avoided her eyes, too exhausted to question why a man needed to visit a fire station on his wedding day. Now, standing alone in the bathroom of an apartment that apparently wasn't even theirs, unease settled like fog in her mind, thick and impossible to see through. She pushed it down, grabbed her purse, and walked out the door. The courthouse waiting room smelled like floor polish and stale coffee, the kind of institutional scent that clung to government buildings everywhere. Lindsay sat on a wooden bench near the marriage office, her white dress drawing curious glances from people passing through the hallway. She checked her phone. 1:58 p.m. 2 minutes until the rest of her life. By 2:10, her leg had started bouncing with nervous energy she couldn't contain. By 2:20, her calls to Evan were going straight to voicemail, and her texts showed no delivery confirmation at all. By 2:40, worry had gnawed its way through her chest and settled somewhere deep in her stomach, cold and heavy. A clerk approached her bench, clipboard in hand and sympathy poorly hidden behind professional courtesy. "Miss Morris?" The woman's voice was gentle in a way that made Lindsay's throat tighten. "The groom hasn't arrived yet. Would you like to continue waiting, or—" Lindsay opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She just stared at the empty hallway behind the clerk, willing Evan to appear, willing this to be some kind of misunderstanding. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she nearly dropped it in her rush to check the screen. Evan's name. Finally. Baby, huge fire broke out downtown. "I'm in the middle of it right now. Can't get away. Please sign your part of the paperwork. I'll be there within an hour to sign mine. It's just a formality. We'll celebrate tonight. Love you." Relief and suspicion crashed together in her chest, leaving her breathless and uncertain. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, a response half-formed that she couldn't bring herself to type. He's fighting a fire. He's saving lives. That's who he is, a hero. But even as the thought tried to take shape, it felt hollow, like words she was reciting from a script she no longer believed in. She closed her eyes and forced the doubt down, burying it beneath the weight of the decision she'd already made. "I want this life. I promised. I'm doing the right thing." When the clerk returned, Lindsay stood and smoothed her dress one more time. "I'll sign my portion now." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "He'll be here soon to complete his." The clerk nodded and led her to a small office where paperwork waited on a wooden desk. Lindsay picked up the pen, her hand trembling only slightly, and wrote her name on the line marked Bride. The ink looked permanent. Final. The marriage will be official once the groom signs and we process the certificate. The clerk collected the papers with efficient movements. "He has until end of business today." Lindsay nodded, not trusting her voice, and walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunlight that felt too bright for the hollowness spreading through her chest. She tried Evan's phone 3 more times on the walk back to the apartment, straight to voicemail, every time. Maybe his phone died, maybe he's still at the fire scene, maybe there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this. The reassurances felt thin, worn through from overuse. But she clung to them anyway because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. The neighborhood looked different in daylight, grittier, more worn down, the kind of place where people minded their own business, because getting involved meant trouble. Lindsay walked faster, her heels clicking against cracked sidewalk, her white dress drawing attention she didn't want. She rounded the corner to their building and stopped dead. A man she'd never seen before, middle-aged, heavy-set, wearing a stained undershirt, was carrying one of her boxes out of the apartment and dumping it on the landing. "Hey!" The word tore out of her before she could think. "What are you doing? That's my home. Those are my things." The man barely glanced at her, just grabbed another box and tossed it onto the growing pile with a thud that made something inside it crack. "Your home?" He laughed, the sound harsh and humorless. "Sweetheart, this is my apartment. I let a buddy crash here for a week as a favor, some guy named Evan who said he was between places. He dropped the last box and crossed his arms, blocking the doorway. Next thing I know, there's a woman's clothes in my closet and dishes in my sink. You want to explain that? Lindsay's thoughts scattered like dropped marbles, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing, even as understanding dawned slowly. Then, all at once. Evan didn't rent this apartment. Evan had borrowed it, temporarily, without telling her. There must be some mistake. Her voice cracked, breaking on the words. Evan said he signed a lease. He said this was our place. Evan said a lot of things, apparently. The man shrugged, unmoved by the desperation bleeding through her composure. Look, I don't know what he told you, and I don't care, but you need to take your stuff and go. Now. He stepped back inside and slammed the door. The deadbolt clicked into place with a sound that echoed through the empty stairwell like a gunshot. Lindsay stood frozen on the landing, surrounded by cardboard boxes and scattered belongings, her white wedding dress suddenly feeling like a costume for a role she'd never actually been cast in. She pulled out her phone one more time. No missed calls, no new messages, no sign that Evan Hale even remembered she existed. Her shoulders sagged under invisible weight as the truth settled over her, heavy, suffocating, impossible to deny. What have I fallen into? The question echoed through her mind, unanswered and terrifying, as afternoon shadows stretched across the stairwell and swallowed her whole. The sound of an engine cut through the evening air, low, powerful, unmistakable. Lindsay turned toward the street just as a black SUV rounded the corner, followed by a second one, both moving with the kind of deliberate precision that belonged to men who never rushed because they never had to. The first SUV stopped directly in front of the building, and the door opened before the engine had fully died. Tony Salvatore stepped out. Black suit, broad shoulders, amber eyes that found her immediately, standing on the landing in her ruined white dress, surrounded by cardboard boxes and scattered belongings. Something flickered across his expression. Satisfaction, triumph, and underneath it all, something that looked almost like tenderness. Two of his men flanked him as he walked toward the building, their presence radiating the kind of quiet threat that made the apartment owner take an instinctive step backward. Tony stopped at the base of the stairs and looked up at her, his mouth curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Let me guess. His voice carried easily in the evening air, calm and dripping with contempt that wasn't aimed at her. Your con artist boyfriend left you stranded again. Fury burned hot behind Lindsay's ribs. Go away, Tony. I don't need your help. I don't want anything from you. Tony's smile widened, and he began climbing the stairs with unhurried steps, each one bringing him closer while she stood rooted in place. He stopped one step below her, close enough that she could smell cedar and something darker, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Get Lindsay's belongings. He spoke to his men without looking away from her face. Load them into the second vehicle. We're taking them home. Lindsay's breath caught. Home? What home? I don't have a home. Thanks to Evan, I don't have anything. Tony reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather folder, holding it up with the casual confidence of a man presenting a winning hand. You have a home, Lindsay. You have a name. You have everything you need. He opened the folder and turned it toward her. A marriage certificate, official seal. 2 signatures at the bottom. Lindsay Morris Salvatore. Anthony Michael Salvatore. Her eyes widened, and for a moment the world tilted sideways so violently she thought she might fall. No. The word came out strangled. That's not possible. I signed the papers for Evan. I was marrying Evan. Were you? Tony's voice dropped lower, intimate. You signed your portion at 2:47 p.m. The groom line was still empty when I arrived at 3:15. He tucked the certificate back into his pocket, so I signed it myself. You can't do that. Her voice shook with fury. You can't forge a marriage? I didn't forge anything. I signed my own name on an incomplete marriage certificate. The clerk was very helpful once I explained the situation. He took another step closer, his chest nearly touching hers, his breath warm against her temple. You've been Mrs. Salvatore for 1 hour and 10 minutes. The words brushed against her ear like a secret. Welcome to the family, Lindsay. Her control fractured, and she shoved against his chest with both hands, hard enough that a lesser man would have stumbled. Tony didn't move. I am not your wife. The scream tore out of her, raw and desperate. You can't buy me. You can't own me. Tony caught her wrists before she could shove him again, his grip firm but not painful. Evan called me 2 hours ago. His voice came out deadly quiet. He accepted the 500,000. He's driving toward another city with my money in his pocket and your name already forgotten. The words landed like blows, and Lindsay felt tears burning behind her eyes. You paid him to abandon me on my wedding day. I paid him to show you who he really was. Tony released her wrists, but his hands found her waist instead, pulling her closer, despite her rigid resistance. And now he's gone. Let me go. She meant it to sound commanding, but it came out broken instead. Tony leaned down until his forehead nearly touched hers. I'm not buying you, Lindsay. His voice dropped to something raw, almost vulnerable, the first crack in his armor she'd ever seen. I'm a man in love with you, and I'm the solution to every problem you have. Her eyes burned, tears threatening to spill. I'm not going anywhere with you. I don't care what that certificate says. I'm not your wife. Tony's smile was equal parts danger and promise. You're coming with me. Before she could respond, his arm hooked behind her knees, and he lifted her off the ground, cradling her against his chest like she weighed nothing, like her struggles meant nothing. Put me down! Lindsay beat her fists against his shoulder. Tony! He was already walking down the stairs, his men falling into step around them, her boxes being loaded into the second SUV. We're going home. Our home. Just the two of us. He deposited her into the back seat, sliding in beside her before she could scramble for the opposite door. The locks clicked. The engine purred to life. Lindsay pressed herself against the far window, her chest heaving with fury and fear, and something she refused to acknowledge, something that felt dangerously close to relief. Tony watched her from across the leather seat, his amber eyes soft in a way that contradicted everything he'd just done. I know you hate me right now. His voice came quiet, almost gentle. But one day you'll understand. Everything I do for you. Lindsay turned her face toward the window and watched Chicago blur past, a woman in a ruined white dress, married to a man she barely knew. What have I become? The SUV carved through Chicago's outskirts as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Lindsay pressed herself against the window, her forehead resting on the cool glass, watching the city give way to winding roads and iron gates. Tears burned behind her eyes, anger at Evan, humiliation at being abandoned, fury at Tony for swooping in like some dark knight who thought money could fix everything, and underneath it all, something else, something she refused to name. Tony sat beside her in silence, his presence filling the space between them like something physical. She could feel his gaze on her profile, patient and watchful, waiting for something she wasn't willing to give. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, his hand crossed the leather seat and found hers. Lindsay's breath caught. She should pull away, should slap his hand, should scream at him again. She didn't move. His fingers laced through hers with surprising gentleness, his thumb tracing circles on her palm that made her skin feel too tight. You don't have to worry anymore. His voice came low and warm, wrapping around her like something dangerous, pretending to be safe. We're going to be very happy together. Lindsay kept her face turned toward the window, refusing to look at him, refusing to acknowledge the way her pulse had quickened at his touch. The road curved sharply, and the trees parted to reveal what lay beyond. Her breath stopped. The mansion rose from the hilltop like something out of a fever dream, modern, sprawling, all glass and stone and sharp angles that caught the dying light. It sat alone against the darkening sky, isolated and magnificent and terrifying in its grandeur. Tony leaned closer, his lips nearly brushing her ear as he spoke. "This is our home." Pride colored his voice, but there was something else underneath it, something almost vulnerable. "I bought it for you, for us. Everything inside you can change however you want. The decoration, the furniture, all of it. I just wanted it to be ready when you arrived." Lindsay turned to face him, and all the emotions she'd been holding back crashed together in her chest like waves against rocks. "You think you can buy everything, don't you?" The words tore out of her, sharp and cutting. "You're so selfish. You want everything your way, exactly when you want it." Her voice rose, trembling with fury. "How many times do I have to say it? You can't buy me." Tony's expression shifted, the confident mask slipping just enough to show something raw underneath. His hand tightened around hers, and when he spoke, his voice came out rough, stripped of the polished control she'd come to expect. "Why do you keep saying that?" His amber eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Yes, I buy things. I buy everything. But your love—" He paused, his jaw working, like the next words cost him something. "I can't buy that. I know I can't. That's why I'm trying to earn it. That's why I'm creating a chance for us." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, the touch achingly gentle. "Every time I see you, Lindsay, I want to be worthy of a woman like you even more." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And I've never wanted anything more in my life." The confession hung between them, heavy with implications Lindsay wasn't ready to examine. Before she could respond, the SUV pulled through the mansion's gates and stopped in front of an entrance flanked by columns that seemed to stretch toward the sky. Rocco was already at the second vehicle, directing two other men as they unloaded Lindsay's cardboard boxes with military efficiency. He caught her eye as she stepped out of the SUV, his weathered face arranged into something that might have been respect. "Should these go to the master bedroom, Mrs. Salvatore?" The name hit Lindsay like a slap, and her spine went rigid as steel. "Don't call me that." The words came out sharper than she intended. Rocco's eyebrows rose fractionally, but he said nothing, just nodded and continued directing the men with quiet commands. The mansion's front doors swung open, and two young women in crisp uniforms appeared, their heads bowing in synchronized greeting. Mrs. Salvatore. The taller one spoke with practiced warmth. "Welcome home." Lindsay's chest constricted like a fist closing around her heart. "No." She held up one hand, her voice cracking despite her best efforts. "My name is Lindsay Morris, not Salvatore. Lindsay Morris. Do you understand?" The women exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unsure how to respond to a bride who seemed to hate her own wedding. Tony appeared at Lindsay's side, his hand finding the small of her back with possessive familiarity. "Honeymoon jitters." His voice carried easily, smooth and reassuring. "A sudden wedding, lots of emotions, perfectly normal." He guided Lindsay forward with gentle pressure. "Please have dinner prepared in an hour. My wife needs time to settle in." Lindsay let herself be led through the entrance, too exhausted to fight anymore, at least for now. The moment they were out of earshot, she pulled away from his touch and turned to face him. "I'm going to run." Her voice came out steady despite the tremor in her hands. "First chance I get, I'm gone. You can't keep me here." Tony's smile curved slowly, equal parts danger and admiration. "And I'll find you." He took a step closer, closing the distance she'd created. every single time. I'll bring you back. Lindsay's teeth clenched so hard her jaw ached. Don't you ever give up. Tony's hand rose to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with a tenderness that contradicted everything about this situation. When it comes to you. His amber eyes held hers, unwavering. Never. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she hated herself for the way her body responded to his touch, hated the warmth spreading through her despite everything, hated the traitorous thought that whispered she'd never been wanted like this before. She stepped back, breaking the contact before she could do something she'd regret. I need to be alone. Tony nodded once, his expression unreadable. 3rd floor, end of the hall. Your room is ready. His gaze followed her as she moved toward the staircase, something possessive flickering in his amber eyes. Settle in. I'll come find you soon. The words should have sounded like a courtesy. Instead, they landed like a warning. The bedroom was everything Lindsay had feared and more. Massive windows overlooked the grounds, now purple with twilight. A 4-poster bed dominated the center of the room, draped in silk the color of champagne. Soft lighting cast everything in golden warmth, and fresh flowers sat on the nightstand. Not roses, she noticed, but something simpler. Wildflowers. As if someone had actually paid attention to what she might prefer. She stood in the doorway, her ruined white dress still clinging to her body, and felt her eyes roll toward the ceiling. He really thinks I'm going to share a bed with him. The thought moved through her, equal parts fury and disbelief. Like this changes anything. Like I'm just going to accept being kidnapped and married against my will. But underneath the anger, something colder crept in. What if he doesn't give me a choice? Her brain conjured worst-case scenarios in rapid succession. What if this is all leading somewhere I can't escape from? What if... She forced herself to breathe, pressing her palm flat against her sternum where her heart was racing. No, he won't force me. He's controlling and obsessive and completely insane. But he's not that. The conviction felt thin, worn through by everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Lindsay crossed to the window and stared out at the darkening grounds, trying to find some anchor in the chaos of her thoughts. A soft knock echoed through the room. She froze, every muscle tensing. Tony's voice came from the other side of the door, quiet but unmistakable. Lindsay. A pause, waited with patience she didn't trust. We're not done talking. Tony's voice came through the door, low and unhurried, stripped of the commanding edge she'd grown accustomed to. Lindsay, you don't have to open the door, but you need to hear me. She didn't move. His footsteps shifted closer, and she imagined him standing just on the other side of the wood, close enough to touch if the barrier between them disappeared. He told her she could hate him, that he could live with that, but he couldn't let her misunderstand him. His whole life, everyone had wanted something from him, money, power, loyalty, so he'd learned to keep everyone at arm's length because it was safer that way. But Lindsay had never asked him for anything, and that's why he couldn't stay away from her. That's what was destroying him. His voice cracked just barely, and Lindsay pressed her palm harder against the window, her heart hammering so loud she was certain he could hear it. I'm not buying you. I'm not trying to control you. A pause, waited with something raw. I'm choosing you. The word hit her like a physical blow. Choosing, not taking, not claiming. She heard his palm press flat against the door, could almost feel the warmth of it through the wood. He told her he wasn't angry that she wanted to run, wasn't angry that she didn't want him, but he needed her to know he wasn't there to force her. He was there to wait for her. If someday, even for 1 second, you look at me and think, maybe, I'll hold on to that second for the rest of my life. Silence pooled between them, heavy and absolute. You can tell me to leave, but I'll never walk away from your door. Footsteps retreated down the hallway, fading into nothing. Lindsay stood motionless, tears tracking hot down her cheeks for reasons she refused to examine. The next morning, Tony stood in the foyer with Rocco, their conversation dying the moment Lindsay appeared on the staircase. She wore clothes she'd found laid out in the closet, clothes that fit perfectly, tags still attached, clearly purchased for her. Dante Roselli knows where we live. Tony's voice carried no emotion, just facts. He's been watching the property. Security is doubling, and you don't go anywhere without protection. Lindsay pulled her arm free when his hand found her elbow. I have a job, Tony. You'll go to work, but you'll go in my car with my men and another vehicle following. His eyes held hers, and she saw something underneath the command, real, genuine fear for her safety. Non-negotiable. Fine, but only because I need to work, not because you told me to. His mouth curved. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Mrs. Salvatore. The black SUV pulled up to Chicago General with a second vehicle behind it, and Lindsay stepped out, feeling like a mob wife in a movie she'd never auditioned for. Tara was waiting by the entrance, her eyes going wide as she took in the convoy. Lindsay grabbed her friend's arm and pulled her inside, explaining everything in a rushed whisper, the marriage certificate, Evan's disappearance, Tony signing the papers in his place. Tara stared at her for a long moment, then shook her head with disbelief. You married Tony Salvatore, hot, mysterious, rich guy, Tony Salvatore. She grabbed Lindsay's shoulders. And you want to divorce him? Are you insane? He's mafia, Tara. Or close enough. Before Tara could respond, a commotion at the nurses' station drew their attention. Delivery men were struggling through the doors, arms overflowing with white roses, bouquet after bouquet heading toward Lindsay. Delivery for Mrs. Salvatore, about 1,000 stems total. Lindsay's hands shook with fury. 1,000 roses to a hospital where people were sick and dying, like the whole place was a stage for his romantic gestures. And then Tony walked through the entrance doors, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his amber eyes finding her immediately. He told her he'd wanted to visit his wife, that being apart from her for even an hour made him restless. Lindsay hissed that this wasn't some stage for his gestures, that people were dying here. Something flickered across his expression, not anger but hurt. Why is it so hard for you to accept that someone values you? The question came out quiet, almost gentle. Why do you fight so hard against being cared for? He turned and walked away before she could answer, leaving her standing in a sea of white roses, with her thoughts tangled into knots. An hour later, Lindsay was walking past the pediatric oncology wing when movement through a window caught her eye. She stopped mid-step, her breath catching. Tony sat on the edge of a hospital bed, his expensive jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up. A small boy, maybe 6 or 7, bald from chemotherapy, was wrapped around him in a hug so fierce it made Lindsay's chest constrict. The child's mother stood nearby, tears streaming down her face as she clutched Tony's hand. Lindsay watched Tony pull back just enough to say something that made the boy laugh, a real laugh, bright and unexpected, in a place where laughter was rare. His hand came up to ruffle the child's remaining wisps of hair, the gesture so natural, so tender, that something cracked open inside her chest. The hospital director appeared at Lindsay's elbow, following her gaze. He's been doing this for years. Director Harrison's voice carried genuine warmth. Donates to our pediatric program, pays for treatments families can't afford, never wants anyone to know about it. Lindsay's throat worked around words that wouldn't come. Tony emerged from the room, and his face transformed when he saw the children waiting in the hallway, open, warm, genuinely happy. She watched him crouch to their level, watched him laugh in a way she'd never seen before, watched that familiar gesture of running his hand through his dark hair look completely different when joy softened his features. This man is my husband. The man who sends 1,000 roses and married me without consent is the same man who holds dying children and makes them laugh. She stepped back from the window before he could see her, pressing herself against the wall. No, this doesn't change anything. He still manipulated me, still thinks he can control my life. But even as she repeated the words, something had shifted. Something she couldn't take back. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Lindsay wasn't sure if she wanted to escape anymore. The dress arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. Lindsay was sitting on the edge of the bed, still processing everything she'd witnessed at the hospital, when Tony appeared in the doorway, holding a garment bag like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'd like you to wear this tonight." His voice carried no demand, only quiet hope. "We never had a honeymoon. Let me at least give you a proper celebration dinner." Lindsay's first instinct was to refuse, to push back against another gesture designed to buy her affection, but the image of Tony holding that sick child kept floating through her mind, his laugh, his gentleness, the way his whole face had transformed into something she'd never seen before. Maybe I should give him a chance, just to know who he really is. The thought settled into her chest before she could stop it. Fine. The word came out softer than she intended. One dinner. Tony's smile was worth more than the dress, more than the mansion, more than everything he'd tried to give her since this nightmare began. It was real, unguarded, almost boyish. "Thank you." He set the garment bag on the bed. "I'll wait for you downstairs." The dress was ivory silk, floor-length, with a neckline that dipped just low enough to be interesting without being indecent. It fit her like it had been made specifically for her body, which, knowing Tony, it probably had. Lindsay studied her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, her makeup subtle but polished. She looked like someone who belonged in Tony Salvatore's world. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it sent warmth spreading through her like honey. She descended the staircase to find Tony waiting in the foyer, dressed in a charcoal suit that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. His amber eyes tracked her movement, darkening with something that made heat bloom low in her belly. Magnificent. He circled her slowly, his gaze drinking in every detail. "You're absolutely magnificent." Lindsay felt blood rush hot beneath her skin, and she looked away to hide the effect his words had on her. Tony stopped in front of her and pulled a velvet box from his jacket pocket. "I want you to wear this." Inside lay a necklace, delicate white gold chain, a single diamond pendant that caught the light like captured starfire. Lindsay shook her head automatically. "Tony, I can't." "Please." He took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles with aching gentleness. "Don't deprive me of the pleasure of seeing this on you." Something in his voice, raw, almost pleading, made her resistance crumble. She turned and lifted her hair, letting him fasten the clasp against her neck. His fingers lingered on her skin for just a moment longer than necessary, and electricity sparked across every point of contact. Perfect. His breath ghosted warm against her ear. "Now let's go celebrate." The restaurant was the kind of place Lindsay had only ever seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across marble floors, white tablecloths that probably cost more than her monthly rent, waiters who moved like shadows attending to every need before it was spoken. The moment they walked through the door, the atmosphere shifted. Staff members straightened their postures. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Every eye in the room turned toward Tony Salvatore like flowers tracking the sun, some with respect, some with fear, all with recognition. "Mr. Salvatore." The head waiter appeared instantly, bowing with a deference that bordered on reverence. "Your usual table is ready. The chef has prepared a special menu for this evening. We've also taken the liberty of selecting wines from your preferred vintages." Tony nodded once, his hand finding the small of Lindsay's back as they were led through the restaurant. She felt the weight of stairs following them, Curious glances at the woman on Tony Salvatore's arm whispered speculation behind manicured hands. "Who is she? Is that his wife? I heard he got married." The fragments of conversation drifted past her ears, making her acutely aware of how visible they were. How visible she now was, simply by association. Their private alcove overlooked the city lights, Chicago sprawling beneath them like a carpet of stars. Once they were seated and the waiter had disappeared with their drink orders, Lindsay leaned forward, her curiosity finally overwhelming her caution. "Tony," she kept her voice low, "what exactly do you do? What is your business?" Tony's mouth curved into a smile that managed to be both charming and slightly dangerous. "My family has been in the same business for 150 years. He swirled his wine glass, watching the light play through the red liquid. "Land and rents, real estate, property management, collections." Lindsay's heart hammered against her ribs, and she forced herself to ask the question that had been burning in her mind since the night she'd found him bleeding in an alley. "Are you mafia?" Tony didn't flinch. Didn't look away, just held her gaze with those amber eyes that saw everything. "I don't take what isn't mine." His voice came measured, deliberate. "But I am a hard businessman. Managing this much property, collecting rents from people who don't always want to pay, dealing with competitors who would rather see us fail." He paused, something darker flickering beneath the surface. Sometimes being soft isn't an option. Lindsay's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "Call it mafia if you want." Tony set down his glass. "But I don't deal in drugs. I don't deal in weapons. I deal in real estate and the complications that come with it. When dangerous people cross our path, we handle them. That's all." "Who shot you?" The question came out before she could stop it. "That night I found you. Are we in danger now?" Tony reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm that made her skin feel too tight. "Your life is more precious to me than my own." His voice dropped lower, intimate despite the crowded restaurant. "I've taken every precaution. Dante Roselli and his family, our feud goes back 50 years. They believe we've blocked them in certain business dealings. There's a legal case pending that will settle everything soon." Lindsay pulled her hand back, her gaze dropping to the tablecloth. "You don't need to know more than that." Tony's voice gentled. "I won't bring that darkness into your world any more than I have to." She should have pushed harder, should have demanded answers. Instead, she found herself nodding, accepting his half-truths, because some part of her, a part she didn't want to examine too closely, had already started to trust him. And with every passing moment, every word, every glance from those amber eyes, Tony Salvatore was becoming more attractive to her than she could bear to admit. They returned to the mansion just before midnight, the air between them charged with something neither acknowledged aloud. Lindsay retreated to the bedroom and changed into her nightgown, a simple silk thing that suddenly felt far too revealing. She was brushing her hair when a knock sounded at the door. Tony stood in the hallway, fresh from the shower, a white towel wrapped low around his hips. Water droplets still glistened on his shoulders, tracing paths down his chest. "My pajamas are in here." His voice came casual, but his eyes traveled down her silk nightgown in a way that made heat pool low in her stomach. "The staff must have assumed we were sharing the room. They put all my things in the closet." He stepped inside, moving toward the wardrobe, and Lindsay found herself unable to look away, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, defined muscles visible beneath skin that looked warm to the touch. The towel wrapped around his hips left little to the imagination. Lindsay thought of the women on the street who had stared at him like he was something to devour. For the first time, she understood exactly why. "Tony." Her voice came out rougher than intended. "The children at the hospital. The director said you've been helping them for years. Why? Tony turned to face her, something shifting in his expression, the mask slipping to reveal the man underneath. He crossed the room slowly, stopping close enough that she could smell cedar and something darker. His fingers rose to touch her hair, so light she barely felt it. When I was 15, my 8-year-old sister died of cancer. The words came quiet, stripped of all pretense. We had money, all the money in the world, but we couldn't save her. Lindsay's lips parted, her heart clenching with unexpected pain. We spent so much time in that hospital, watching her fade. Tony's fingers drifted from her hair to her cheek, tracing along her jaw with aching tenderness. When I took over the family business, I started donating. Every child we save reminds me of her, of what we lost. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Lindsay's breath caught in her throat. Tony. His name came out like a prayer she hadn't meant to speak. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, to stop this, to remember all the reasons she should hate him. She didn't move. His lips met hers, soft at first, questioning. And then Lindsay's self-control frayed at the edges, and she was kissing him back with a hunger that surprised them both. Her fingers found his chest, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady pound of his heart. His hands tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss. Fire licked through her veins, burning away every rational thought until there was nothing left but this. His mouth, his hands, the press of his body against hers. When his tongue swept against her lower lip, want crashed through her like a tidal wave. She gasped into his mouth, her body arching toward him, craving more. And then reality crashed back. Lindsay pulled away, breathless, her chest heaving. "I'm not ready." The words came out shaky but firm. "Tony, I need more time." Tony's hands fell away from her body, but his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Whenever you're ready." His voice came rough with barely controlled desire. "I'm at your command, Lindsay. Whenever you want me, to make you happy in every way, I'll be here." He collected his clothes and walked to the door, pausing to look back at her one last time. "Good night, Mrs. Salvatore." The door closed behind him, and Lindsay sank onto the bed, her whole body trembling with need she couldn't satisfy. Her lips tingled, remembering the pressure of his mouth. Her skin still burned where his hands had touched. Every nerve ending lit up like Christmas lights, refusing to quiet down no matter how many deep breaths she took. "What is happening to me?" She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to force the memory of his kiss from her mind. It didn't work. If anything, the darkness behind her eyelids made it worse, made her imagine what would have happened if she hadn't stopped him. Sleep was impossible. 2 hours later, Lindsay gave up, pretending she could rest. She pulled on sweatpants and a hoodie and slipped outside, desperate for air that didn't smell like Tony, for space that wasn't saturated with the memory of his touch. The garden was beautiful in the moonlight. Manicured hedges casting geometric shadows, a stone fountain murmuring softly, paths that wound through carefully tended roses and night-blooming jasmine. Lindsay walked without direction, her bare feet cool against the stone pavers, her mind spinning with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Am I falling in love with him? The thought crept through her, dangerous and undeniable. Would that be so terrible? She stopped beside the fountain, watching moonlight dance on the water's surface. He's a criminal. Maybe not the kind who deals drugs or kills for hire, but still, a man who lives outside the law. A man who took your choice away. But another voice whispered back, softer and more insistent. He holds dying children and makes them laugh. He donated millions to save lives. He waited outside your door instead of forcing his way in. He stopped the moment you asked. Lindsay wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the mild night air. Why is the only thing I can think about being with him? feeling his hands on my skin, hearing him say my name. Her body betrayed her, leaning into the memory of his orbit even when he wasn't there. Footsteps crunched on gravel behind her, and Lindsay spun to find Rocco approaching with concern carved into his weathered features. "Mrs. Salvatore." His voice carried quiet authority. "You need to go inside. We have men patrolling, but it's not safe for you to be out here at this hour." Lindsay opened her mouth to argue, but Rocco cut her off. "A car has been circling the property." His jaw tightened. "We intercepted communications. The Roselli family. They're watching, waiting for the right moment." Ice water flooded Lindsay's veins, and she let Rocco escort her back inside without protest. That night, she dreamed of Tony's hands on her skin and woke up aching for something she'd sworn she didn't want. The next day at work passed in a blur of patience and paperwork, Lindsay's mind constantly drifting back to the kiss, to Tony's confession, to the warmth spreading through her every time she pictured his face. She caught herself smiling at nothing, at the memory of his laugh, at the way his eyes had softened when he talked about his sister, at the feeling of his hands in her hair. Nurses asked if she was feeling okay. Patients commented on how happy she seemed. Happy. The word felt foreign. When had she last been truly happy? When her shift ended, Tara caught her at the locker room, bouncing with restless energy. "Let's grab a drink." Tara's smile was persuasive. "There's a pub around the corner, nothing fancy. Just one beer to decompress. You look like you need to talk." Lindsay glanced toward the staff exit, where she knew Rocco's men would be waiting. Black SUVs, watchful eyes, constant surveillance. They watch me every second. Follow me everywhere. I can't even walk to a coffee shop without an armed escort. Just once, just this once, I want to feel like myself again. Like Lindsay Morris, not Mrs. Salvatore. Okay. The word was out before she could reconsider. "But we have to be quick. Side entrance." They slipped out through the staff door, moving fast through the side streets, and Lindsay felt something like freedom rushing through her veins for the first time in days. The evening air was crisp, the streets busy with commuters heading home, and for a few beautiful minutes she was just a woman walking with her friend. Tara laughed beside her. "God, you look like you just escaped prison." "Feels like it sometimes." Lindsay smiled despite herself. "You have no idea what my life has become." "Oh, I have some idea." Tara bumped her shoulder playfully. "Married to a gorgeous billionaire who sends you 1,000 roses and looks at you like you're the only woman in the world. Truly tragic." Lindsay was about to respond when she noticed a black sedan keeping pace with them on the street, probably just traffic. Stop being paranoid, but the car didn't pass, didn't speed up, just followed. They were halfway to the pub when the sedan suddenly pulled up alongside them, tires screeching against the curb. The door opened. Lindsay had just enough time to see a man's face, cold eyes, thin smile, a scar running down his left cheek, before hands grabbed her arms and yanked her off the sidewalk with brutal efficiency. Tara's scream echoed through the street as the door slammed shut, cutting off the sound of the outside world. The sedan accelerated into traffic, weaving through cars with practiced skill, and Lindsay found herself pressed against the leather seat, with a gun digging into her ribs and her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. The man with the scar smiled at her, a smile that held no warmth, no humanity, only cold calculation. "Mrs. Salvatore," his voice dripped with false courtesy. "Mr. Roselli has been very eager to meet you. He has so many questions about your husband's business practices." Lindsay's blood ran cold, and the last thing she saw before a hood dropped over her head was the Chicago skyline disappearing behind tinted glass. The warehouse smelled like rust and motor oil, the kind of industrial decay that spoke of abandonment and violence. Lindsay's wrists burned where the rope dug into her skin, her arms tied behind a metal chair that creaked every time she shifted. A bare bulb swung overhead, casting harsh shadows across concrete walls, stained with things she didn't want to identify. Terror wrapped icy fingers around her lungs, but she forced herself to breathe, to think, to stay alive long enough for Tony to find me. The thought came unbidden, and she didn't push it away. Somewhere in the chaos of the past weeks, she'd started believing in him, started trusting him, Footsteps echoed through the warehouse, and a man emerged from the shadows. He was maybe 50, heavy-set, with thinning grey hair slicked back from a face that might have been handsome once before cruelty carved permanent lines around his mouth. His smile made her skin crawl. The smile of someone who enjoyed other people's pain. So, he circled her chair slowly, his voice thick with false pleasantry. "You're Tony Salvatore's great love." Lindsay's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. The man, Dante Rosselli, it had to be, stopped in front of her and reached out, his fingers brushing across her shoulder in a touch that made nausea roll through her in waves. Beautiful. His hand moved to her face, tracing her cheekbone with a possessiveness that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with power. I can see why he's so attached. His fingers slid into her hair, gripping the blonde strands, and Lindsay's stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. "Let's see how Tony says no to us now." Dante's breath was hot against her ear. "When his precious wife is in my hands." The news reached Tony in his study. One moment he was reviewing security footage, searching for any sign of where they'd taken her. The next, Rocco burst through the door with a phone pressed to his ear and fear written across his weathered features. "Boss, we found the car. It's heading toward the industrial district, Rosselli's old warehouse." Tony's vision went red. His hand swept across the desk, sending papers and crystal glasses crashing to the floor. The lamp followed, shattering against the wall in an explosion of glass and light. "How?" The word tore out of him like a wound. "How did you let this happen? I gave you one job, protect her, one, and you failed." Rocco stood motionless, accepting the fury because he knew he deserved it. Tony's hands shook as he gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white, his chest heaving with rage he couldn't contain. Lindsay. My Lindsay. In Rosselli's hands. The thought was unbearable. The image of Dante touching her, hurting her, using her as a pawn in their endless war. Then Rocco spoke again, and everything changed. "Boss. The necklace. It has GPS." Tony's head snapped up. The diamond pendant. The one he'd clasped around her neck just hours ago, watching it settle against her collarbone like it belonged there. He'd planned for this, hoped he'd never need it, but some part of him had always known that loving Lindsay meant painting a target on her back. "Get everyone." Tony's voice dropped to something cold, controlled, deadly. "Every man we have, we're bringing her home." Back in the warehouse, Dante was growing impatient. He'd expected tears, begging, the satisfying sight of Tony Salvatore's woman breaking under pressure. Instead, Lindsay sat rigid in her chair, her green eyes blazing with defiance that made his jaw tighten with irritation. "You know?" He crouched down to her eye level, close enough that she could smell the cigar smoke clinging to his expensive suit. "Your husband cost me 3 of my best men last year, exposed my operation, made me look weak in front of the other families." Lindsay's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Good." Dante's hand cracked across her face before she could react, the impact snapping her head to the side and filling her mouth with copper. She spat blood onto the concrete floor, then turned back to face him with eyes that held no fear. Only contempt. "So you're the coward who shot him in an alley." Her voice came out steady, despite the throbbing in her cheek. "Too scared to face him directly. Had to ambush him like a rat." Dante's face flushed dark with rage. "You little—" "Tony is going to find me." Lindsay cut him off, her voice rising with conviction she felt down to her bones. "And when he does, he's going to make you regret every second of this." Where is this coming from? Some distant part of her marveled at her own courage. Since when do I trust anyone this completely? But she knew the answer. She'd known it since the moment she watched him hold those sick children at the hospital, his face soft with a tenderness that contradicted everything the world said about men like him. Since he'd stood outside her door and confessed his fears instead of forcing his way in. Since he'd stopped the moment she'd asked, even when his whole body was trembling with need. He's not the monster everyone warned you about. The realization settled into her chest like something warm and certain. He's a man who does terrible things to protect the people he loves. And somehow, I became one of those people. Tony Salvatore was a dangerous man. Maybe a criminal, or maybe just a ruthless businessman who played by different rules. A force of nature that had swept into her life uninvited and rearranged everything she thought she knew about herself. And somewhere along the way, he'd become hers. Not because he'd claimed her, not because he'd married her without consent, but because he'd shown her, again and again, that underneath the darkness lived a heart capable of profound love. I love him. The thought crystallized with startling clarity. God help me. I actually love him. Dante grabbed her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. Let's see how brave you are when... The warehouse door exploded inward. Tony came through first, flanked by Rocco and 6 of his men, moving with the controlled violence of someone who'd been doing this his entire life. His amber eyes found Lindsay immediately, tied to the chair, blood on her lip, Dante's hand on her face, and something in his expression shifted from fury to something far more terrifying. Cold, absolute, lethal. "Get your hands off my wife." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The promise of violence in Tony's voice was louder than any scream. Dante's men reached for their weapons, and chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded through the warehouse, muzzle flashes and ricochets and the meaty thud of bodies hitting concrete. Tony moved through it like a force of nature, his fists connecting with faces, his body a weapon honed by decades of survival. Rocco took a bullet to the shoulder and kept fighting, blood soaking through his shirt as he covered Tony's advance toward Lindsay. Tony reached her just as Dante tried to use her as a shield, pressing a gun to her temple with shaking hands. "Stop!" Dante's voice cracked with desperation. "One more step and I—" Tony didn't stop. He moved with speed that shouldn't have been possible, knocking the gun aside and driving his fist into Dante's face with a crack that echoed through the warehouse. Dante crumpled, and Tony was on him in an instant, his hands wrapped around the older man's throat. "You touched her." Tony's voice was barely human. "With these hands, you put your filthy fingers on my wife." He grabbed Dante's hand and twisted, and the sound of breaking bones was drowned out by Dante's scream. "Tony!" Lindsay's voice cut through the violence, steady despite everything. "Tony, stop! The police are coming!" He looked up at her, his eyes wild, his chest heaving, and slowly the killing rage drained from his expression, replaced by something far more vulnerable. He'd called them himself. Tipped them off before coming here, because even in his fury he'd known that killing Dante would mean prison, would mean leaving Lindsay alone. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Tony crossed to Lindsay and cut her bonds with a knife from his belt, then gathered her into his arms like she weighed nothing at all. "I knew you'd come." Her voice broke against his neck. "I knew it, Tony." He held her tighter, his face buried in her hair, his whole body shaking with relief and rage and love so fierce it threatened to consume him. "Always." The word came out rough, broken. "I will always come for you." He carried her out of the warehouse and into the flashing lights of police cars, leaving Dante Roselli bleeding on the concrete floor, surrounded by officers who would ensure he never touched anyone again. 3 hours later, Lindsay sat on the edge of the bed, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The police had taken statements. Paramedics had cleaned the cut on her lip. Rocco was in surgery, expected to make a full recovery, and Tony was kneeling at her feet, his head bowed, looking more broken than she'd ever seen him. "I put you in danger." His voice came out hollow, devastated. "Because of me, because of who I am, what I do, you almost—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'll never forgive myself." Lindsay set down her tea, watching him struggle with words that clearly cost him everything. "Tomorrow, we'll start the divorce proceedings." Tony's hands gripped his own knees, knuckles white. "I'll find you a place. Somewhere safe, far from here, far from me." He finally looked up, and the pain in his amber eyes stole her breath. "Being away from me is the safest thing for you. I was arrogant. I thought my love and my power could protect you. I ignored the danger of being with me." He swallowed hard. "You don't love me anyway. I can't ask you to risk your life for a marriage you never wanted." Lindsay reached out and cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing across his cheekbones with aching tenderness. "It's too late for that, Tony." His breath caught. "What?" She slid off the bed and knelt in front of him, meeting him at eye level, her hands still framing his face. "I think—" Her voice trembled, but her gaze held steady. "I think right now I want you more than I've ever wanted anything in my life." Tony's eyes searched hers, desperate hope warring with disbelief. "Lindsay, are you sure? I don't know if I'm the man you deserve anymore." She pulled his face closer, her forehead resting against his. "Tony Salvatore." Her breath ghosted warm across his lips. "If you don't kiss me right now, I'm going to start believing you're not the man I deserve either." Something broke in his expression. The last wall, the final defense, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss started desperate, hungry. Two people who'd almost lost each other, pouring everything into the press of lips and tongue and breath. His hands tangled in her hair. Her fingers gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, closer, never close enough. He lifted her without breaking the kiss, carrying her to the bed and laying her down with a reverence that made her heart ache. "I need to hear you say it." His voice came rough against her throat. "Tell me this is real. Tell me you want this." Lindsay pulled him down to her, her legs wrapping around his waist, her body arching into his. "I want this." She gasped as his mouth found her collarbone. "I want you. Her breath caught as he pulled back to look at her, his amber eyes burning with an intensity that made everything else fade to nothing. "I love you." The words fell from her lips like a confession, like a prayer. "God help me, Tony. I love you." His reaction was immediate, a sound somewhere between a groan and a sob, his forehead dropping to hers, his whole body trembling. "I love you more." His hands framed her face like she was something precious, something sacred. "More than my own life, more than anything I've ever known." Clothes disappeared between desperate kisses, her nightgown pooling on the floor, his shirt torn open by impatient hands, barriers falling away until there was nothing left between them but skin and heat and want. Tony worshipped her body like a man who'd been starving for years, his mouth mapping territories he'd only dreamed of, his hands learning the geography of her pleasure. Every gasp, every moan, every whispered plea became a roadmap he followed with devastating precision. And when he finally moved inside her, Lindsay cried out with a pleasure so intense it bordered on pain. "Look at me." His voice came rough, commanding even now. "I want to see your eyes when you fall apart." She obeyed, her gaze locked with his as they moved together in a rhythm as old as time, slow at first, savoring, then building faster as need overtook patience. Her nails raked down his back, his mouth captured her cries, and when release finally crashed over them both, shattering them into a million pieces, Lindsay sobbed his name into his shoulder while Tony buried his face in her hair and whispered hers like a prayer. They lay tangled together afterward, heartbeats gradually slowing, sweat cooling on flushed skin. "I never knew," Lindsay's voice came out hoarse, wondering. "I never knew it could feel like this." Tony pressed a kiss to her temple, his arms tightening around her. "This is just the beginning." His voice held promise and certainty in equal measure. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you how it can feel." Morning light filtered through the curtains, painting everything in shades of gold. Lindsay woke slowly, awareness returning in pieces. The warmth of Tony's body curled around hers, the pleasant ache in muscles she'd forgotten she had, the feeling of absolute safety she hadn't experienced since childhood, since before her parents died, since before the world taught her that love was something that got taken away. Tony stirred beside her, his arm tightening around her waist, his lips pressing against her shoulder. "Good morning, Mrs. Salvatore." The name didn't make her flinch anymore, didn't feel like a cage or a brand or a sentence. It felt like home. She turned in his arms, finding his amber eyes soft with sleep and something deeper, something that looked like wonder. "What happens now?" Her voice came out husky, satisfied. Tony's smile was slow, predatory, full of promise. "Now?" He rolled her beneath him, his weight pressing her into the mattress in a way that made heat bloom low in her belly all over again. "Now I'm going to spend hours making love to you because I can't get enough of you. I don't think I ever will." He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, until she was gasping. "Then we're going on our honeymoon, a real one. I'm going to give you the most beautiful vacation of your life." His hand traced down her side, finding curves he'd memorized in the darkness. "And then—" His voice dropped to something tender, almost shy. "I want to put a baby in here." His palm pressed flat against her stomach, warm and possessive and full of hope. "You're where I belong, Lindsay." He looked into her eyes with an openness that made her throat tight. "You're everything I never knew I needed." Lindsay pulled him down and kissed him with everything she had, every fear she'd conquered, every wall she'd torn down, every moment of doubt that had led to this impossible certainty. She'd found him bleeding in an alley, a stranger who would become her whole world. He'd claimed her, pursued her, refused to let her go, even when she'd fought him with everything she had. And somehow, against all odds, they'd found their way to this, tangled together in morning light, finally home, finally whole. He'd been her salvation, and she'd chosen her cage. Because with him, captivity felt like freedom. "Thank you for staying with me until the end. Now I'm asking you, if a man with a dark past and a dangerous life fought for you the way Tony fought for Lindsay, against everyone, against everything, would you open your heart, or would his shadows be too much to accept? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know. And one last question. Where in the world are you watching this from? Knowing my story's journey makes me so happy.